Mark Thompson sat in the corner booth of Murphy's bar, his hands wrapped around a glass of beer that had long since gone warm. The amber liquid remained untouched, creating rings of moisture on the wooden table beneath it. The dim lighting of the bar cast shadows across his face, hiding the red rim around his eyes from the other patrons who occasionally glanced his way. On the table before him lay a stack of legal documents, their crisp white pages stark against the dark wood. The words, "Final Custody Decree," were printed in bold letters across the top page, and below them, the details that would change his life forever. His 8-year-old daughter Emma would be moving to California with her mother in exactly 7 days. 7 days until his world would become empty. Mark had read the papers so many times that he could recite them by heart. Joint custody had been reduced to scheduled visits twice a year. Christmas and summer vacation, if he could afford the plane tickets. The judge had ruled in favor of his ex-wife Sarah, citing her stable job opportunity and new husband's financial security. Mark's income as a mechanic at Thompson Auto Repair, the shop his father had left him, was deemed insufficient for providing Emma with the same opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent every penny of his inheritance fighting this battle in court, hiring lawyers he couldn't afford, missing work to attend hearings. The very act of fighting for his daughter had made him appear less capable of caring for her in the eyes of the law. His phone buzzed against the table, the screen lighting up with a text message. Emma's name appeared with a little heart emoji next to it, something she had insisted on when he first got his smartphone 2 years ago. "Daddy, are you okay? Mom said you seemed sad when you picked me up today." Mark stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could he tell her? That in 1 week, their Tuesday night dinners at the diner would end? That their Saturday morning trips to the park would become memories? That he had failed to keep his promise to always be there for her? He set the phone down without responding. The bar around him hummed with quiet conversation. A couple in their 30s shared appetizers and laughed at something on the woman's phone. 2 men in business suits discussed a project deadline over whiskey. An elderly man sat at the counter, reading a newspaper while nursing what looked like his regular evening drink. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that Mark's entire existence was crumbling. Another round? The bartender approached, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "I haven't finished this one yet," Mark replied, gesturing to his untouched beer. "I noticed." She pulled out a cloth and began wiping down the table, her movements slow and deliberate. "Rough day?" Mark looked at her, then at the papers spread before him. "You could say that. Want to talk about it?" "Sometimes it helps." "Not really much to say. Just lost my daughter today." The words came out flat and emotionless, as if he were commenting on the weather. The bartender paused in her cleaning. "I'm sorry to hear that. Lost how?" "Custody battle. Her mother's taking her to California next week." Mark finally took a sip of his beer, grimacing at how flat it had become. 8 years old. "She's 8 years old and I'm going to miss watching her grow up because I don't make enough money." "That's not fair." "No," Mark agreed. "It's not." The bartender finished cleaning and moved on to other customers, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts again. He picked up one of the papers and scanned it again, though he knew every word by heart. The section about his financial status felt like a personal attack written in legal language. Insufficient resources. Limited housing accommodations. Inability to provide educational advantages. What the papers didn't mention was how Emma's face lit up every time he picked her up from school. They didn't talk about their tradition of building blanket forts on rainy Sunday afternoons, or how she insisted he read her the same bedtime story 3 times every night she stayed at his apartment. The court documents couldn't capture the way she giggled when he made funny voices for different characters, or how she always saved the cherry from her ice cream sundae for him because she knew it was his favorite. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Emma. "I made you a drawing today. It's us at the park feeding the ducks. I'll show you tomorrow." Mark's chest tightened. Tomorrow was their last Tuesday dinner together. After that, he would have to explain to his 8-year-old daughter why her father wouldn't be around anymore. How do you tell a child that the legal system has decided someone else would be a better parent? How do you explain that love isn't enough when measured against bank account balances and suburban house values? He thought about the drawing she mentioned. Emma had always loved to draw, covering his refrigerator with pictures of their adventures together. The park where they fed ducks every weekend was her favorite place in the world. She would bring old bread in a paper bag and squeal with delight as the ducks swam toward them. Mark would sit on the bench and watch her, feeling like the luckiest father alive. Now that park would be 2,000 miles away from her new home. Mark pulled out his wallet and counted the bills inside. $43. His checking account had maybe 200 more, and his savings were completely gone. The lawyer had cost him everything, and for what? He hadn't even been able to afford the kind of legal representation Sarah had obtained through her new husband's corporate connections. The apartment Emma loved visiting would have to go too. He couldn't afford the rent on his own, not after missing so much work for court appearances. He'd probably have to move in with his sister temporarily, sleeping on her couch until he could figure something out. At 35 years old, he would be starting over with nothing to show for the life he had built. His sister Karen had offered to let him stay as long as he needed, but he knew her husband wasn't thrilled about the arrangement. They had 2 young children of their own and barely enough space as it was. Mark would be another mouth to feed, another person taking up room in their already crowded house. The worst part was the silence Emma would leave behind. His apartment would no longer echo with her laughter or her endless questions about how things worked. There would be no more tiny shoes by the door, no more cartoon shows playing on the television, no more requests for, just one more story, at bedtime. The emptiness would be complete and absolute. Mark remembered the day Emma was born. He had held her in the hospital room, marveling at how small and perfect she was. Her tiny fingers had wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and he had made a silent promise to always protect her. He had sworn to himself that she would never doubt his love, never question whether she was the most important thing in his world. Now he was breaking that promise through no choice of his own. His phone buzzed a 3rd time. This message wasn't from Emma. "Mark, I know this is hard. Emma keeps asking when she can see you again after we move. I told her we'd figure something out." The message was from Sarah. Despite everything that had happened between them, she wasn't cruel. She understood that Emma adored her father, and she knew this separation would hurt their daughter too. But understanding didn't change the reality of the situation. Mark typed back, "I don't know how I'm going to afford to visit." "We'll figure something out," came the reply. "Maybe she can come back for part of summer vacation." Maybe. The word felt hollow and uncertain. Maybe if he could save enough money. Maybe if Sarah's new husband agreed to help with travel costs. Maybe if the court would allow it. Too many variables, too many things outside his control. The couple at the nearby table burst into laughter again, and Mark felt a stab of resentment toward their obvious happiness. He wanted to warn them that life could change overnight, that love wasn't always enough to keep a family together. But he stayed silent, knowing his bitterness was unfair. The elderly man at the counter folded his newspaper and left money on the bar. As he walked past Mark's table, he nodded politely. Mark wondered if the man had children, if he had ever faced the possibility of losing them. Did everyone carry hidden pain, or was Mark uniquely unlucky? Tomorrow he would have to tell Emma the truth. He had been putting it off, hoping for a miracle that never came. She deserved to hear it from him rather than figuring it out on her own when the moving trucks arrived. The conversation would be the hardest thing he had ever done. Mark finally picked up his phone and typed a response to Emma's earlier message. "I love you too, sweetheart. I can't wait to see your drawing tomorrow." It wasn't much, but it was honest. Whatever happened next week, whatever distance would separate them, his love for Emma would never change. That much he could promise her, even if he couldn't promise to always be there in person. The bar continued its quiet hum around him as Mark sat with his lukewarm beer and his legal papers, trying to find the strength to face tomorrow's goodbye. Mark had been sitting in the same booth for nearly 3 hours when a woman approached his table. She was well dressed in a dark blue suit, her brown hair pulled back neatly, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone used to making important decisions. Despite her polished appearance, there was something in her eyes that reminded Mark of his own reflection, a deep sadness that expensive clothes couldn't hide. "Excuse me," she said softly, "would you mind if I sat here? The rest of the bar seems pretty full." Mark looked around. The bar wasn't actually full at all, but he didn't have the energy to point that out. He gestured to the empty seat across from him and began gathering his legal papers into a messy pile. "You don't have to move those," the woman said as she slid into the booth. "I'm Linda, by the way." "Mark." He continued stacking the papers anyway, feeling embarrassed about his personal business being spread across the table. Linda ordered a glass of red wine from the passing bartender and then sat quietly for a moment, studying Mark's face. "Rough night?" "Something like that." Mark took another sip of his now completely flat beer and grimaced. "I saw the custody papers," Linda said gently. "I didn't mean to look, but the heading was visible when I walked up. I'm sorry you're going through that." Mark looked at her more carefully. Most strangers would have minded their own business or offered empty platitudes like, "Everything happens for a reason." Linda's voice carried a weight that suggested she understood real loss. "It's final now," Mark said. "My daughter moves to California next week with her mother. I get to see her twice a year if I can afford the plane tickets." Linda nodded slowly. "How old is she?" 8. Emma's 8 years old. Speaking her name out loud made his chest ache. "She's the best kid in the world. Loves to draw, asks a million questions about everything, saves the cherry from her ice cream for me because she knows I like them. She sounds wonderful." "She is. And I'm losing her because I don't make enough money." The bitterness in Mark's voice surprised even him. "Her mother married some guy who can give her dance lessons and private tutors and a house with a swimming pool. I fix cars for a living and live in a 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery." Linda's wine arrived, and she thanked the bartender before taking a small sip. "Can I tell you something, Mark? I lost my son 5 years ago today. That's why I'm here, actually. I come to this bar every year on this date because it's the only place I can think of where I won't run into anyone who knows me or wants to offer me sympathy." Mark stopped feeling sorry for himself for a moment and really looked at Linda. She was probably in her early 40s, successful by all appearances, but there was a hollow quality to her eyes that he recognized from his own mirror. "I'm sorry," he said. "How did it happen?" "Car accident." David was 17, driving home from his part-time job at the bookstore. A drunk driver ran a red light. Linda's voice remained steady, but Mark could see her hands trembling slightly around her wine glass. "One phone call changed everything. Just like your custody hearing changed everything for you." "But that's different," Mark protested. "Your son died. Emma's still alive, she's just going to be far away." "Loss is loss," Linda said firmly. "You're losing your daily relationship with your daughter. You're losing the chance to be part of her everyday life. That's a real grief, and you shouldn't minimize it." Mark felt something shift in his chest. For months, he had been telling himself that his situation wasn't that bad compared to what other people went through. Parents who lost children to illness or accidents had it worse. He should be grateful that Emma was healthy and happy, even if she wouldn't be nearby. "I run a non-profit organization," Linda continued. "We focus on family crisis intervention and support services. I started it about 2 years after David died because I realized how many parents were struggling with different kinds of loss and trauma, and how few resources were available to help them. That must be hard work." "It is, but it's also healing. Helping other families navigate their worst moments gives meaning to my own experience." Linda paused and looked directly at Mark. Tomorrow morning, we're launching a new division of our organization. A 24-hour crisis helpline specifically for parents who are dealing with custody battles, family separations, and the unique challenges of being a single parent. Mark wasn't sure where she was going with this, but he found himself genuinely interested for the first time in months. The thing is, Linda continued, I can hire counselors with all the right degrees and training, but what parents in crisis really need is to talk to someone who has walked in their shoes. Someone who understands the specific pain of fighting for your child and feeling like the system is working against you. Makes sense. When I saw you sitting here with those papers, looking exactly the way I felt 5 years ago, I realized something. You have experience that could help other fathers who are going through what you're going through right now. Tonight, when I go home, I'm going to spend the night doing final preparations for tomorrow's launch. Setting up phone systems, training volunteers, making sure everything is ready. Linda leaned forward slightly. When I said, stay with me tonight, I wasn't making some kind of romantic proposition. I was offering you a chance to spend the night helping me finish preparations, and maybe discovering that your pain could become someone else's lifeline. Mark stared at her, trying to process what she was suggesting. You want me to work for you? I want you to consider leading our single father support division. The salary isn't huge, but it's steady. More importantly, it's a chance to turn your experience into something that helps other dads who are sitting in bars tonight feeling exactly the way you feel right now. The idea seemed impossible. Mark had never worked in anything related to counseling or social services. He fixed engines and changed oil and occasionally helped customers figure out what was wrong with their cars. He wasn't qualified to help people with serious emotional problems. I don't have any training in that kind of work, he said. We'll provide training. But honestly, Mark, what those fathers need most is someone who gets it. Someone who can say, I know exactly how you feel, and mean it. Someone who has spent sleepless nights wondering if they failed as a parent, who has counted pennies to afford legal fees, who has had to explain to their child why things are changing. Linda pulled a business card from her purse and placed it on the table between them. Family Crisis Support Network. That's us. We've helped thousands of families over the past 3 years, but we've never had someone specifically dedicated to supporting fathers going through custody battles. Mark picked up the card and read it. The address was downtown, about 20 minutes from his current apartment. The website looked professional and established. I would have to think about it, he said slowly. Of course. But here's what I'm hoping, come with me tonight. Help me get everything ready for our launch tomorrow. Answer some calls from fathers who need to hear from someone who understands their situation. See if this feels like something you could do. If it doesn't work out, you haven't lost anything. If it does work out, maybe you found a way to make sure Emma knows her father is doing something important and meaningful. Mark thought about Emma's question from earlier. She had asked if he was okay, and he hadn't known how to answer. What if he could tell her that he was helping other kids stay connected to their fathers? What if he could explain that even though they would be apart, he was working to make sure other families didn't have to go through the same thing? What would I actually be doing? He asked. Tonight, you'd help me set up phone lines and test our computer systems. Tomorrow, you'd start taking calls from fathers in crisis. Some of them will be facing custody battles. Some will be dealing with divorce. Some will be single fathers who don't know how to handle a sick child or a teenager who's getting into trouble. You'd listen to their stories, share your own when it's helpful, and connect them with resources that might help. And you think I could actually help people? I think you could save lives, Mark. I think there are fathers out there tonight who are feeling so hopeless that they're considering giving up entirely. They need to hear from someone who has been exactly where they are and who chose to keep fighting. Mark looked at his phone, where Emma's last text message was still visible on the screen. She had drawn them feeding ducks at the park. Tomorrow he would have to tell her they wouldn't be going to that park together anymore. But maybe he could also tell her that her father had found a way to help other families stay together. If I did this, he said carefully, would I be able to afford to visit Emma? Would the job pay enough for plane tickets to California? Linda smiled for the first time since she had sat down. The job would definitely pay enough for plane tickets. And Mark, if you're as good at this as I think you could be, there might be opportunities for growth. We're expanding our services all the time, and we need people with real experience to lead those efforts. Mark looked around the bar one more time. The couple was still laughing together. The businessmen were discussing weekend plans. Everyone else seemed to be living normal, uncomplicated lives. Maybe it was time for him to stop feeling sorry for himself and start figuring out how to build something new from the pieces of his old life. Okay, he said finally. Let's go help some fathers. Linda finished her wine and stood up, gathering her purse. Mark carefully folded his legal papers and put them in his jacket pocket. They would still be there tomorrow, but maybe they wouldn't feel quite as heavy. As they walked toward the door together, Mark felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. The Family Crisis Support Network office was located on the third floor of a downtown building that had seen better days. As Linda unlocked the door and flipped on the lights, Mark could see why she needed help preparing for the morning launch. Boxes of equipment were stacked everywhere, phones sat unconnected on desks, and computer monitors displayed error messages. I know it looks like chaos, Linda said, hanging her jacket on a chair. But we're closer than it appears. Most of the technology is installed, it just needs to be tested and organized. Mark rolled up his sleeves and looked around the room. There were 6 desk stations, each equipped with a computer, phone, and what looked like a complex system for routing calls. A large whiteboard covered one wall, filled with phone numbers, procedures, and training notes. Despite the mess, he could see that Linda had put serious thought and planning into this operation. Where do we start? He asked. Linda handed him a thick manual labeled Crisis Call Procedures and pointed to the nearest desk. Each station needs to be tested. We need to make sure the phones connect properly, the computers can access our database, and all the emergency contact information is loaded correctly. For the next 2 hours, Mark and Linda worked side by side, untangling phone cords, testing computer connections, and organizing training materials. Mark had always been good with his hands, and the technical setup reminded him of troubleshooting problems in car engines. Everything had to connect properly for the whole system to work. You're really good at this, Linda observed as Mark successfully configured his third phone system. Have you ever done this kind of technical work before? Cars are basically just complicated machines with lots of interconnected systems, Mark explained, plugging in another phone line. This isn't that different. Everything needs to connect to everything else, and when something doesn't work, you trace the problem back to its source. As they worked, Linda told him more about the organization's history and goals. She had started the nonprofit with a small grant and a handful of volunteers after realizing how many families were struggling with crises that didn't fit into traditional support categories. Parents dealing with custody battles, single mothers facing eviction, fathers who had lost jobs and didn't know how to tell their children. The thing about family crises, Linda explained while sorting through training materials, is that they don't happen during business hours. A father finds out he's losing custody at 5:30 on a Friday afternoon. A single mother gets evicted on a Sunday morning. Kids have emergencies in the middle of the night. We wanted to create a resource that was available whenever families needed it most. At midnight, Linda's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and frowned. That's our temporary forwarding number. Someone's calling the crisis line even though we haven't officially launched yet. She answered the phone with a professional greeting, listened for a moment, then looked at Mark. It's a father in Chicago. He just got served with custody papers and he's having what sounds like a panic attack. Would you be willing to talk to him? Mark felt his stomach clench. I don't know what to say to him. Just tell him your story, Linda said softly. Tell him what you're going through and how you're dealing with it. Sometimes that's all people need to hear. Linda handed him the phone. Mark took a deep breath and introduced himself. Hi, this is Mark. I heard you're going through some custody issues. I can't breathe, the man on the other end said. His voice was shaky and desperate. They want to take my kids away. My ex-wife is saying I'm an unfit parent because I lost my job last month. The papers say I have 2 weeks to respond, but I don't have money for a lawyer. Mark recognized the panic in the man's voice because he had felt it himself just hours earlier. What's your name? Robert. My kids are 5 and 7. They're everything to me. Robert, I need you to take a slow breath for me. Can you do that? Mark found himself falling into a calm, steady tone he hadn't known he possessed. I know exactly how you're feeling right now because I just went through the same thing. Today I lost my custody battle for my 8-year-old daughter. Oh God, I'm sorry. How did you get through it? Mark looked around the office, at Linda organizing materials, at the phone systems he had just finished setting up, at the whiteboard full of procedures designed to help families in crisis. I'm still figuring that out, Robert. But I can tell you that you're not alone, and losing your job doesn't make you an unfit parent. It makes you someone who's dealing with a difficult situation. For the next 20 minutes, Mark talked Robert through his panic attack and helped him make a list of practical next steps. He gave him information about legal aid services in Chicago, helped him organize his thoughts about his strengths as a father, and most importantly, convinced him that the situation wasn't hopeless. When Mark hung up the phone, he realized his hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in months, he had felt useful. He had helped another human being get through the worst moment of his life. How do you feel? Linda asked. Like I actually know something valuable, Mark said slowly. Like maybe my experience wasn't just a waste. The phone rang again. This time it was a single father in Texas whose ex-wife had just informed him she was moving their daughter to another state. After that, a call from a dad in Florida who had just learned his son had been arrested and he didn't know how to help. Then a father in Oregon who was struggling with his teenage daughter's depression and felt like he was failing her. With each call, Mark felt more confident. He wasn't giving legal advice or trying to solve complex psychological problems. He was simply sharing his own experience and listening to other fathers who felt lost and overwhelmed. He told them about his own mistakes, his own fears, and his own determination to keep trying even when everything seemed hopeless. You have a gift for this, Linda said during a brief break between calls. I've been doing crisis counseling for 3 years, and I've rarely seen someone connect with callers the way you do. I just remember how alone I felt sitting in that bar tonight, Mark replied. If someone had called me 6 months ago when I first got the custody papers, if someone had told me that other fathers go through this and survive it, maybe I wouldn't have spent all these months feeling like I was drowning. At 4 a.m, Linda made coffee and they took a longer break. The office looked completely different now. All the phones were working, the computers were connected, and the desk stations were organized and ready for the official launch in a few hours. Mark, I want to offer you the position permanently, Linda said, sitting across from him at one of the newly organized desks. Full-time, with benefits and a salary that will definitely cover plane tickets to California. You'd be our Director of Single Father Support Services. I don't have any formal qualifications, Mark protested. I never went to college. I don't have a degree in social work or psychology. You have something better than a degree. You have experience, empathy, and a natural ability to help people feel less alone. Tonight you've talked 7 fathers through some of the worst moments of their lives. You've probably prevented at least one suicide attempt and definitely helped several men find the strength to keep fighting for their children. Mark thought about Emma's text message, still unanswered on his phone. He thought about the conversation he would have to have with her tomorrow about the move to California. But he also thought about Robert in Chicago, who had ended their call by saying, "Thank you for saving my life tonight." What would the job actually involve? Mark asked. You'd manage our single father support program. That means taking calls, but also developing resources, maybe traveling to speak at conferences, training other volunteers. We're hoping to expand into other cities eventually, and we'd need someone with your experience to help set up programs in other states. Other states like California? Linda smiled. Definitely including California. We've had inquiries from organizations in Los Angeles and San Francisco who want to partner with us. Mark felt a spark of possibility that he hadn't experienced in months. So I might be able to work in California sometimes. Visit the communities where Emma will be living. More than that. If you're good at this job, and I think you will be, you could eventually be traveling all over the country helping fathers and their families. You'd be building something meaningful while staying connected to Emma's new world. The phone rang again, and Mark automatically reached for it. This time it was a father in Nevada who had just been granted custody of his 3 young children after their mother entered rehab, and he was terrified that he didn't know how to take care of them properly. I understand that fear, Mark told him. Being responsible for children is scary even under the best circumstances. But you know what? The fact that you're calling for help shows you're already being a good father. Good fathers ask questions when they don't know something. When that call ended, Mark looked at Linda and nodded. I'll take the job. Just like that. Just like that. You're right, my experience with Emma, even losing her, has taught me things that other fathers need to know. Maybe I can't change what happened to my own family, but I can help other families stay together. Linda stood up and shook his hand formally. Welcome to the Family Crisis Support Network. Your first official day starts in about 3 hours when our volunteers arrive for the launch. Mark pulled out his phone and finally responded to Emma's text from earlier that evening. Hi sweetheart. I'm okay. I love you very much, and I have something exciting to tell you tomorrow at dinner. I found a new job helping other daddies who miss their children, just like I'm going to miss you. But this job means I'll be able to visit you in California, and maybe you can even help me sometimes by drawing pictures for the office where I work. He added, I can't wait to see your duck drawing tomorrow. Save room for extra ice cream, we're celebrating. As the sun began to rise outside the office windows, Mark felt something he hadn't experienced in months. He felt like a father who had something valuable to offer his daughter. Not money or a big house, but a sense of purpose and a way to make the world a little better for families like theirs. Emma might be moving to California, but their connection would remain strong. And now Mark had found a way to help ensure that other children wouldn't lose their fathers the way he had almost lost hope of remaining close to Emma. The phone rang again, and Mark answered it with confidence, ready to help another father find his way through the darkness.